if a government shutdown can't end our wars, and a massive debt crisis can't end our wars, and an outraged population can't end our wars, what can? Now, a new study out of the University of Pennsylvania could provide some answers. Researchers there were trying to figure out what exactly happens to support for wars if a nation implements a draft. Now, here's what they discovered. They found that mass support for a war falls by 17% when there is a draft relative to when there is an all-volunteer force. Further, the shift is driven by self-interest. Support falls most sharply among those who would most directly shoulder the burden of a draft, the young who would themselves be drafted, and parents who would see their children drafted. So, if the United States did have a draft, is it reasonable to assume that perhaps we would not be engaged in all these military misadventures across the globe? Well, here to offer their takes are Seton Motley, president of Less Government, and Ryan Clayton, a progressive strategist here in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, Seton, I want to begin with you. Can't you safely say that there is a little bit of a disconnect between our wars abroad and the burden that falls upon the military folks and the people who make the policy decisions in Washington? Can't you say that perhaps if there were a draft, we would all feel the pain more and maybe think twice before sending our troops abroad?
I would agree slightly with your first part of your assertion, not at all with your second. You'll recall that the military personnel with whom the non-military leaders consult are also volunteer. So it's not like they have to be...
But the military personnel with whom they consult are the folks at the top who aren't battling on the front lines. They're not...
But they did. So they understand and appreciate. I mean, they weren't born generals. They got there through going through the ranks. And they understand the cost and the toil that is entailed in war and the horrible bloodshed and all that. So they will counsel the leaders to do this or not do this based upon personal experience and understanding what's going on. And they're volunteer, the military is volunteer. I want to say very quickly that these people have to rely on the people to their left and their right in a foxhole. And they're much more confident that everybody's there voluntarily. We have the best military in the world, and it's voluntary. So I don't think we need a draft.
So you're saying, so if by that logic, we had a draft in World War II, we had a draft in World War I, we had a draft in the Vietnam War, so were those guys not looking out for their counterparts, their soldiers, because they were
I think you saw a lot of that. When John Kerry came back, it was readily apparent he wasn't looking out for his fellow soldiers. He was looking out for himself and himself only. And there's a bunch of examples. The whole Winter Soldier movement is a quintessential example of all that.
Okay. Well, Ryan, do you agree with this assertion that the generals know what the toll of war costs, and so they're going to counsel the politicians with the best advice possible because they know just how bad death is?
Well, look, we have a great volunteer military in America, great men and women that serve their country with discipline and honor. And, you know, blessed are those peacemakers, you know, those people that go out there and ensure that there is peace and safety throughout our country and throughout our world. What I would say is that we have a great country with rights, but we also need to exercise some responsibility with that. And we should really have a National Service Act that requires that everybody that does benefit from those rights shares in the responsibilities of keeping our country together, keeping it safe, and having a military option for that service. Because at the end of the day, when you have that option, and when you make sure that you democratize the military forces, people are going to think twice and think more about putting our military men and women in harm's way. You know, it's going to be a lot higher bar to set before we send people into combat. And I think that that's going to be something that impacts the political decisions we make, that are right now, they're just too cheap and easy to send us another class of citizens halfway across the world to do something that other people aren't sharing the burden of with their own friends and their own family. But if everybody knows that your own children or your neighbor's kids can get shipped halfway around the world, we think twice, we think maybe even 3 times before we take that decision.
Seton?
I want to thank Cindy Sheehan's son for his nice little diatribe there. There are many, many members of Congress who have children, brothers, sisters in the military, and they voted to go to war. This is not a classless thing. I mean, it's not the right that's keeping the ROTC off of the Harvard campus, it's the left. If you want to talk about breaking down the class structure, why isn't Harvard and Yale and Columbia and the Ivy League allowing the ROTC to come and recruit amongst the best and brightest of the country?
Well, if you want to talk about classless, I would talk about how you mentioned Cindy Sheehan's son, who actually died serving his country.
Yes, and as Cindy Sheehan's ex-husband said, he would have vehemently disagreed with everything she did in his name.
All right, but folks, it's not about Cindy Sheehan. It's about the bigger issue of whether we're disconnected from war. And you know, at a time
but we're not
when
disconnected from war.
We're not disconnected from war. When you're seeing a remote-controlled, essentially, war that's covered by, you know, MSNBC, gung-ho MSNBC, and we don't really understand what the costs are. We don't see the toll, the physical toll, the emotional toll on our troops. Don't you think that we're a little bit more likely to rush into conflict?
I got buddies in the Marine Corps, and one of the things, the pictures they sent me online was a picture that said, you know, written on a locker, it said, you know, America's not at war, the Marine Corps is. And what that says is they're calling out to us and saying, look, we need your support. We need you at our back to be able to do what we're doing. But we also need you to be sharing that sacrifice and be here with us or bring us home. Because they've been out there for way too long.
Wait a minute. What side of the ideological spectrum has been with the troops for the last 8 years? Was it Harry Reid who said the war is lost? Or was it the American right, the conservatives, who constantly do fundraisers for the troops? Is it the left, like John Kerry and Harry Reid and Dick Durbin, who compared the troops to Pol Pot and Mao Zedong in Guantanamo Bay?
Look, see, you don't have to prove your patriotism to me.
No, I'm not trying to prove my patriotism.
You're an American citizen, and I think we all
prove...
believe in a healthy and secure America going forward.
No, that's not true. But not every American does. I'm not saying you don't. I'm saying not every American does. But it's been the American left. It's Harry Reid, the war is lost Reid. It's the left that has been undermining the troops.
Afghanistan, where our objective, as stated by our president, is preventing al-Qaeda from having a safe haven, is now seeing a resurgence of al-Qaeda. I mean, the wars are not going well.
We now have a president who's helping al-Qaeda in Libya.
Okay.
Well, al-Qaeda from Iraq is leading the charge against Muammar Gaddafi.
So is Muammar Gaddafi sending you his press releases? Because that's literally cut and paste.
Let's get back on subject.
It's also a fact. Reuters was the first place to report it. Not Muammar Gaddafi, Reuters. And I would say Reuters is not working for Gaddafi. You may want to say that. I'm not. But the fact of the matter is, we didn't have an exit strategy in Afghanistan and Iraq. We didn't have an entrance strategy in Libya. If you want to talk about somebody who's abusing the troops and has no idea what he's doing with regard to putting men and women in harm's way, it's this president right now with Barack Obama in Libya.
Ryan, I'll give you the last word. Do you think that we would have been more likely to have an exit strategy had there been a draft and had we all felt the consequences of rushing into military conflict?
I think it is undoubtable that we're going to make wiser strategic decisions with our military resources, including the men and women in uniform, if everybody has to participate in that and if anybody can be sent off to war. Because right now what it is there's a class of citizens that are bearing the entire burden, and some people just aren't sharing in that sacrifice, and they don't have to worry about it every day when they wake up. But if everybody had to think twice about that, then we'd make much better national security and foreign policy decisions.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I do want to end on the fact that, you know what, we're all very lucky. We get to sit here in our nice Washington studio. We're certainly not making those sacrifices. We have the luxury of debating about it, and unfortunately, that's sad. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for having us.
All right.